There are products that we can manufacture that, based on the raw material, could be made into a variety of different products. Or we could process them further with the waste off of one and yet make a bunch of other products with them. And so it's an important analysis to determine whether or not it makes sense to continue to use the waste off of the main product that we're making to either sell it, dispose of it, or to continue to manufacture additional products from that waste. Um, and a really, they give your example here of dairy, really common one. So milk gets produced and can be sold as milk, or you can process it into cheese. I actually learned to make cheese during the pandemic. That was one of the things I learned. Did not make yogurt. Cream, did make ice cream also. So you've got this one product, milk. Do we sell it as milk, or do we further process it and sell these other products as well? And so the answer is it depends. So here is another example. We've got the Ainsley apple farm, and they grow really nice apples that get sold to grocery stores in bags. And then they have, we'll call them sort of the runts of the litter, the apples that are not really worthy to be sold individually. And at this point, they sell those, as they say, at a deep discount to another manufacturer that uses them to make applesauce. So Ainsley says to themselves, well, we're selling these for 110, or excuse me, $1.10 per dozen, these runt apples. If we were to keep these apples and manufacture them into organic juice, could we ultimately sell this product for a greater profit after looking at all the costs associated with turning apples into apple juice? Then are we better off profit-wise doing that and in adding the additional cost and processes with that, or are we better off just selling the runt apples like we are currently? So it would cost them 30 cents a dozen to prepare them into apple cider or juice. They can sell organic apple juice for $3.50 a gallon. It takes 2 dozen small apples to make 1 gallon of juice. And then we've got costs to produce it of 60 cents per gallon, plus 200,000 in fixed costs for the 1-year lease of the equipment that we need to make for bottling the juice. So they normally harvest and sell 2,400,000 of these sort of small runt apples every year. And so then do we continue to sell them as product for applesauce, or do we keep those to make our own juice? So we get the $1.10 per pound if we just split off and sell them. So it costs us 30 cents to sell the apples, and so that leaves a contribution margin of 80 cents an apple. Now let's look what happens if we decide to turn them, well, let me follow it down with the sell it off as applesauce. So we're selling 200,000 apples. And now let's not confuse this line, because in units sold under the sell and split off, we're talking about apples. And under the process further, we're talking about gallons. So we've got a total contribution margin at the sell off and split of $160,000 is basically we've covered our costs from the sale and we get 160,000 back. We have no additional fixed costs necessary if we're selling them, because we didn't have to purchase this big fancy machine. So we get basically a contribution back in operating income of $160,000. However, despite the fact that we can sell this juice for far more than we can sell a pound of runt apples, or a dozen or whatever it is, doesn't run to apples, the cost to sell it is more. Um, and despite the larger contribution margin, what really gets us in the end is the fact that we've got to buy this machine. If we didn't have to buy a $200,000 machine, the contribution margin would make this completely a worthwhile venture. Because now we're getting 290,000 over and above our variable costs. But in this case, the fixed costs cause this to be a complete deal breaker. So this is an example where if you don't run the analysis entirely, you might lead yourself to the wrong conclusion. You might say, "Oh, look how profitable I am." And my guess is if you watch an episode or two of Shark Tank, you may run into folks that conducted this analysis and may have stopped right at the total contribution margin and decided that one course of action was more profitable without taking the fixed costs into the analysis. We're going to wind up this chapter by talking about the decision making that you have to undertake when resources are constrained, which is frankly most of the time. Um, I as a lawyer can only work so many hours in a day, and so that impacts what I can take in terms of work before I then have to add another lawyer or add support staff, which might mean a bigger office and more internet, more phones, more computers, more all of those things. So, based on the 7 days a week and 24 hours a day I currently have available to me, there are only so many cases that I can take despite what might be coming through the door. So how does one decide when one is constrained? And it could be floor or shelf space. Yeah, number of hours the paralegal team works. Yeah, let's not care about the number of hours you're going to make the lawyer work. So how do we make decisions when we've got constraints? And so in this example, we've got the wood world. They purchase desks and bookcases, and they are able to use the same machinery to do that. And that machinery can only work a maximum of 80,000 machine hours during the year. And that's it. If it ran 24 hours a day, you still couldn't make it produce any more than it is. And so this is what they are able to produce with that. So where they want to challenge us with this example is by telling us that we now have an order for 60,000 desks, 48,000 chairs, and 40,000 bookcases that are going to require 94,000 machine hours. Well, obviously we can't, if we run this thing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and all it can do in a year is 80,000, we will not meet this production run. So what do? Which orders do we fill? Which should we decline? So, thinking back on, looking at the contribution margin, we've got desks, chairs, and bookcases. Based on what we can sell them for and what the direct costs are, we see that we've got much higher contribution margin for desks than for chairs or for bookcases. But if that's the only analysis we do, we're going to fall short. What we need to be looking at is the contribution margin per machine hour, not per item, because it takes more machine hours to produce a desk than it does to produce a chair or a bookcase. Now, if we calculate the cost per machine hour, we then see that all of a sudden the contribution margin for bookcases becomes not substantially, but significantly, certainly higher than it was, and is no longer the lowest, but is in fact the highest of the three potential products. And so basically, what we want to do is fill all of the bookcase orders, because that's going to give us the biggest contribution margin, and then all 60 of the desk orders, and then 20,000 of the chair orders. And then basically at that point, we run out of capacity. But since the chairs are giving us the lowest contribution margin on based on this constraint, which is machine hours, this is where we're going to cut our losses, is on the chairs, as opposed to looking at this before we even look at the constraint. So if we just stopped our analysis without including the constrained resource in it, this would lead us to an incorrect decision, and we would not maximize our profits based on the availability of machine hours. And so we could only do 20,000 of the, how many chairs did they want? They wanted 48,000 chairs. So we would have to reject 28,000 of the chairs. We could do all the desks and all the bookcases, and that would maximize our profitability for the 80,000 machine hours that we have available to us. And that is basically the end of chapter 10.